Meanwhile, there are some topics that emphasize not just the need for global collaboration, but the reality of shared experiences at a local level, a citizen level, in both the European Union and the United States. For decades, the population of both has been slanting urban, with more and more people on both sides of the Atlantic opting to live in cities rather than in the countryside. However, this of course means that space is limited.
And when a pandemic shuts down our ability to go outside, urban residents are left with unprecedented challenges. Yet, as we dive deeper, we find that these challenges are similar in both the EU and the US, and the paths to local resilience are similar as well. We have lessons to learn from each other in the past year of unexpected change. What are some of the best practices for local resilience? How can cities work together based on shared experiences? What have we learned from the adjustments of the past year?
For our next discussion, we welcome representatives from 3 cities: His Excellency Kostas Bakoyannis, the Mayor of Athens, His Excellency Rafał, the Mayor of Warsaw, Ambassador Nina Hachigian, Deputy Mayor of International Affairs for the City of Los Angeles.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Daniel Stander, Special Advisor to the United Nations, and I think my guests need no further introduction. Thrilled to be joined today by Nina, Kostas, and Rafał, respectively, of the cities of Los Angeles, Athens, and Warsaw. Thank you very much for being with us. As we heard in the introduction, I like to think that resilience is always situational and it plays out on the ground. I want to start with you, Nina. Wow, from where I sat, what an incredible year to have just gone through. And it seemed at times almost as if the cities in the United States, and your city in particular, was maybe trying to figure out the pandemic on its own with relatively little support from the national government. How did you go about addressing that? What did that look like? And what does that mean for resilience locally?
Thank you, and I'm really honored to be on this this panel with these very esteemed panelists. So I think, yeah, I can speak for all cities, at least in the U.S., that we really did have to just figure it out on our own, especially at the beginning. We are lucky to have, a very forward-leaning mayor in Mayor Garcetti, and so we acted fairly quickly for an American city and shut down our city quickly. But all the things that we had to do, set up testing, figure out how to feed seniors who were homebound, how to get our homeless shelter, or, turn our rec centers, our play centers into homeless shelters, and get cash to the most vulnerable of our residents. All of those things were incredible logistical challenges that we basically just had to do on our own. So at the beginning, it was, a scramble, as crises always are at the beginning. And then, we slowly figured out how to do it. We set up, the biggest testing site in the US for a time at Dodger Stadium with our own firefighters because, they have some medical training. On and on, but it was all hands on deck all the time. We had a huge scramble for just, masks and PPE, which we were trying to source from all over the place, and, in competition with other cities in the United States, because there was no federal policy. So it was hard, as it was in every city, with lots of tragedy. And we were actually hit, the hardest just, a few months ago. It's kind of even hard to believe where we were just, 4 months ago. So yeah, it was a challenge. But, at the end of the day, we're the ones who know, how to best help our residents, because we're here on the ground listening to them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And actually, one of the things I hadn't considered was potentially that competition between yourself and some of the other cities. But equally, there's a sense of, I almost want to call it co-opetition, because you're all in this together. And if I can come to you, Kostas Bakoyannis, Athens, like Los Angeles, is a member of the Resilient Cities Network. And I can imagine you may be leaning in some way on sister cities around the world, not saying that what works in one country is absolutely in one city is going to work in another, but we're all learning and exchanging ideas. Interested in your perspectives, what it was like for you and the extent to which you tapped into perhaps a global network of cities to help you come through the pandemic.
Absolutely. Networks have been extremely important to all of us. I mean, Mayor Garcetti chairs the C40, which has been a source of invaluable insight and good practices that we have been sharing constantly over the past year, the year and a half. After all, it is a global problem, it's a global challenge, but it does require local solutions. And it is about working bottom up if one wants to be truly effective. In full disclosure, the pandemic came at a particularly cruel time for the city of Athens, just as we were emerging from a very long and deep economic and financial crisis, with a newly found sense of optimism and self-confidence, with our democracy stronger than ever, our institutions intact, and having isolated populists and extremists. However, I think that one of the key lessons for all of us was that we actually learned to listen to the experts. We learned to actually make decisions based on facts and figures. We learned to actually put truth over partisanship and politics. And I hope that this lesson stays with us for the years to come. From day one, we had three main goals. Our first main goal was to make sure that no one is actually left behind. Urban centers are unfortunately full of people who are unfortunate, who are unlucky, who are usually forgotten. So it was the key role of the city of Athens, either through our new homeless shelter or through our new social services like Help at Home Plus, where we actually managed to deliver goods and aid door to door to actually be next to the people who are most in need, to those most vulnerable. Number two, we invested a lot in the digital transformation of the city. This is where COVID was both a crisis and an opportunity. In just a few months, we achieved reforms that were lagging for a number of years. And number three, we actually placed a lot of emphasis on keeping our economy alive and actually going a step further and creating incentives for our economy, especially for our small and medium businesses. We managed to unlock European funds that are going to be extremely useful in the days to come and in the weeks to come as we return to normalcy. And of course, there is a wider agenda for all of us, a wider agenda that all cities share, which has to do with the climate crisis, or to be more exact, the climate emergency. We all know that cities are responsible for 70% of CO2 emissions. So it's about reclaiming and liberating quality public space. It's about sustainable mobility. The 20th century saw cities built around cars. The 21st century needs to see cities built around human beings. So as you see, at the end of the day, everything that unites us is much more than actually what divides us or what separates us. And it's very important that we actually stay true and we remain faithful to our alliances if we actually want to be of use to our citizens.
So much there that resonates and that I want to come back to around the comparison between COVID and climate and around remaining relevant. But what I want to pick up on right now is one lesson that you mentioned was listening to experts. But one of the things that came through really clearly was listening to people. And if you will, the cradle of democracy in Greece. It's lovely to see you not just campaigning on that, but delivering on that. And if I can turn to Rafał now, thinking through the relationship between listening to the people and delivering solutions that meets their needs, whilst at the same time standing on a global stage, working with your national governments. Sometimes we can see that national priorities are in opposition perhaps to local priorities. I'd be very interested in hearing from you how you have, Rafał, dealt with some of those tensions at a time when your people have needed you most?
Yes, hello to everybody. Good morning to you in the United States. Good afternoon to us in Europe. Hello, Kostas. Kalispera. Yes, well, I mean, there were tensions between local governments and national governments, and especially in Poland, where our conservative government does not like us, to put it mildly. And unfortunately, lots of things and relations between us became tense, and there was quite a lot of competition. At the beginning, I mean, it was chaotic, and we understood it because, everyone was overwhelmed. So we decided to do everything in sync with the national government. We were repeating what they were advising us, because it is the national government which is responsible for emergency, and it is the national government which is all the information at hand. But then later on, with the second and the third wave, we decided to take the responsibility into our own hands. I'm responsible for 11 hospitals myself. So we started buying equipment, we started getting ventilators ourselves. Now there's this huge thing about vaccination. So we're organizing our own places, stadiums in which we can actually vaccinate people. And we are also organizing our own experts, because to put it mildly, we were a bit surprised by the level of chaos that we were confronted on the national level. And now, yes, I mean, we were trying to respond to what the people were telling us on the ground, especially our specialists dealing with the hospitals, but also our entrepreneurs, also people who were asking us questions how to actually implement some of the restrictions. And we decided to do it on our own, add certain specificity to it, be a bit quicker on the ground than the national government. And that's what we were doing throughout the crisis. And of course, being in contact with our friends through various networks, C40, Eurocities, but also Bloomberg Harvard Initiative, where we were in sync with some of our colleagues in the United States, allowed us to benchmark, to exchange information, to exchange our views and experiences, and it helped a lot in organizing our response to COVID. And in many places, we were ahead of the national government by simply preparing, for example, for the vaccination process. We knew how to do the preparation better than the national government. We were ready, and we were just ready to receive vaccinations. For example, now we have this massive vaccination program where we set up the places 3 or 4 weeks before the government. Now we're just waiting for them to give us a vaccination, and tomorrow we will start registering people, and in a week we will start this massive program of vaccination. So we are trying to downplay these emotions between local governments and national governments. You can see them all around the world, and we decided to be closer to the people and actually be on the ground and be quicker in response time to the government. And in certain instances, thanks to the exchange of experiences with our friends, we were able to be more effective.
Well, thank you. And we need that agility, because it's at the coalface where everything is most acutely felt. And I wanted to pick up on something that Kostas mentioned, which was making the comparison. He mentioned C40. The pandemic necessarily is a multinational, by definition, issue that we all need to address together. The climate crisis or the climate emergency, similarly so. If I could come back to Nina, and I'm always struck in these conversations around resilience that no city in the world is what I would describe as a single hazard city or a single peril city. We all exist with multiple shocks and stresses, whether it be climate, in your case in Los Angeles, in California, with seismic risk. How do you think about juggling the multitude of shocks and stresses and how they come together in order to plan for them locally and respond to them as you need to?
I think you've hit on the key thing, which is that resilience has to be local. It has to be even more local than a city. It really has to be, in our case at least, neighborhood by neighborhood, because people will be able to respond differently. I mean, we actually need, small areas of the city to have to take responsibility for, their own neighbors, because they're the ones who know who has a dog, who can't get out of the house, so in the case of an earthquake, the more local that we can push down resources, earthquake kits and neighborhood hubs for emergency, the better. And it was true in the pandemic too. We, for example, with our vaccination plan, we're lucky to have a lot of vaccines, and but if we design a system that is for people with cars and with access to the internet and with the ability to take off time of their workday to get a vaccine, we will be missing a huge, maybe more than half of the population of Los Angeles, which doesn't have a car, isn't necessarily well connected to the internet, and can't take time off work. So we have to have different solutions for different parts of the community. And we figure that out by listening and by working with community groups who know their neighborhoods extremely well. So with the vaccine, we have big sites like in Warsaw, and then we also have these very agile mobile teams that go directly to neighborhoods that have been the hardest hit by COVID to make sure that those folks are getting access to the vaccine as easily as possible.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I mean, at the end of the day, resilience is about communities. But I'm also conscious that communities exist at every scale, right? And so we have our neighborhood communities, we have our citywide, our regional communities, our national, and indeed our international communities. If I come back to Kostas, I would love to hear from you. What do we do to strengthen the relationships between those local and regional actors and the international actors in order to build transnational resilience? Is there a role for local actors there, Kostas?
Oh, yes, clearly. There is a role for local actors, and there's a role for local actors for three reasons. Number one, local actors are actually within society. We are the closest democratic institution to society itself. Number two, local actors, by definition, if they want to survive and if they want to be successful, they have to actually form alliances that cross ideological, party or other political divides. It's all about transcending even ourselves. And number three, it's about real solutions to real problems. So I think there's a catalytic role for local actors, but it's very important to stress, and I'm also very conscious of Rafał's presence in our panel, that it also has to do with values. It has to do with democratic values. It has to do with our shared belief system. And we must be very, very clear and not make any compromises when it comes to the democracy itself, because we have seen democracy under threat over the last few years, whether through populism or whether through extremism. And we know very well that democracy has to be defended. We are very optimistic because we have positive news coming from the United States and from the new administration. We have positive news coming from different countries in Europe. So it is about actually going out there and fighting for what we believe in. And local governments and local authorities have an extra advantage that we can actually be more persuasive because we actually deliver to the people. We're actually helpful to the people in a very concrete and tangible manner.
Yeah, I have heard it said on numerous occasions, it's countries that sign treaties, but it's cities that actually deliver. So if I could then come to Rafał, because I agree with everything that's been said here, I wonder what, if anything, is missing, or to put it slightly differently, if there was an ask of the international community, what would you be asking for in order to foster the kind of transnational resilience that we're looking for?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to understand that we in Europe, we are very much interconnected, and in a certain sense, we do create a transnational community. I mean, now, for example, there is this huge recovery fund that will be distributed by the European Union. And now what we are doing as cities in Poland, but also in Europe, we are making sure that this money is not going to be distributed according to political criteria, because Kostas is absolutely right that there is a question of values. I mean, somehow populists do not really win in local elections that often because people make much more pragmatic decisions. So now we're fighting in Poland with a government which simply wants to distribute money according to political criteria, to distribute it equally so that we can actually use the money for real revolution, green revolution, investing in green solutions and innovation and in making Europe digital and so on and so forth. So of course, we need to cooperate, and that's what we're doing. We're creating pressure on the European institutions together through our networks so that the money is used effectively. And we can also do it on an international scene. I mean, C40 is a wonderful example where we can actually get our heads together with Eric, Nina, say hi to Eric, and with all of our colleagues in order to send the right message. I mean, in order to synchronize what we say and what we do in order to benchmark better, in order to exchange our own experiences, which can make us use the money more effectively, and then demonstrate then to both the European institutions, to international institutions, to lenders, to banks, and so on, that we are the ones who really know how to spend the money and invest it. Because now, in this deep crisis, we do have a chance to use it for our benefit and transform our cities. And that's exactly the mission that we have before us. And if we want to do it right, we got to do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very pleased to hear you bring in the financial aspect here, because Kostas talked about solutions, and solutions don't just come from thin air. They need innovation, but they also need innovative finance. So if I could come back to Nina, when you think about accessing capital, public capital, private capital, to drive innovative solutions, whether it be to tackle the pandemic or whether it be to tackle other global crises like the climate crisis, how do you as a city think about playing and accessing that global capital base?
Well, I have to say that, first of all, it's the Biden administration is a huge breath of fresh air, and it is so wonderful to feel like we're being supported by the federal government and not, attacked either, personally or legally or whatever. So that's number one, is as we have a federal government that's coming through with big aid packages and making us solvent again. We have to balance our budget. And they have listened to us and are delivering financially what we need. We've done a few things again and in concert with C40 cities, and I should say, from our point of view, that network, that international network of mayors, that it was started for climate but became for a while a COVID network, was really invaluable. And I don't think people understand the degree to which we're every day talking to our international brothers and sisters, because at the time we felt all alone in the United States doing it on our own, but we knew that cities across the world were sharing it with us. But we've done things like start a global bus consortium for electric buses, so that, LA alone may not move the needle with the market, but if we have a whole bunch of local governments all together pooling what they need for electric buses, we can send a signal to the market. So that's one example of trying to change the market for private finance in the climate situation.
Yeah, thanks again for sharing that. I'd like to stay with that theme of finance, but also bring in this notion of principles and come back to you, Kostas, because I think it's not just about the principles of democracy, while that is, of course, in my mind, sacrosanct. It's also in this resilience context about social equity, social justice, and those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of shocks and stresses and the least able to bounce back. So I wonder if you could talk us through in your community how you support or how you make sure we channel the funds to those that most need it to remain resilient to the potential risks that we face.
Well, it is about livability, it is about sustainability, it is about resilience, but it is also about affordability. And we need to put our money where our mouth is. Now, the good news is, number one, the European Union has moved forward very quickly with the RRF, which Rafał mentioned a bit earlier. We are actually very fortunate in Greece. We have an excellent cooperation with the central government, which has actually proposed a holistic plan that, from what I understand, has actually been very warmly welcomed in Brussels. But we're also very fortunate because we have the European Green Deal. There hasn't been so much discussion about it recently, but we are talking about a project, a 3-decade project that can actually transform the European Union. So moving forward, where do we come in as local governments? We come in because we are able, as I said earlier, to actually deliver bottom up. For you, maybe Athens is the Acropolis. For you, maybe Athens is our historical center. But it's much more than that. It's 129 neighborhoods, 129 communities, and we have to be there. We have to be there with the people, amongst the people. Let me give you just a couple of examples. We have street work right now in the city, 24/7. There are a group of experts and scientists who literally walk the city and are next to those who are homeless. We even test the homeless as we speak right now during the day and during the night for COVID. Or let me give you a second example. We created a new homeless shelter. We are able to host up to 400 people in dignified conditions. No, the problem hasn't been solved, but we have taken a major step forward. And the good news is that we did it all together. It was a city, it was civil society, it was the private sector. We all joined forces.
I would like to leave it here, but I want to just end with a passing word. Resilience, it seems, is absolutely locally defined. We all, though, sit on a global stage, and we know that in times of crisis, it's our international networks as well as our local communities that sustain us. Nina Hachigian, Deputy Mayor of Los Angeles, Kostas Bakoyannis, Mayor of Athens, and Rafał, Mayor of Warsaw, thank you very much for joining us today for an enlightened debate about the role of local government in delivering in transnational resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mayor Bakoyannis, Mayor Trzaskowski, and Ambassador Hachigian. And welcome back to the Atlantic Council headquarters in Washington, D.C.